on the ground. Here in Los Angeles, it's not a cloud in the sky. Beautiful day.
But not for long, I don't think.
I think I heard it was going to rain on Saturday.
And it was pouring, I think, in San Francisco last night.
Okay, which might be part of what's all the snow's going on. Are you guys ready to rumble?
Whenever you'd like.
Okay, can we remove that the slide? Jeff, are you going to go first?
I'm going to go first.
Okay. Can we introduce you in your face first?
Your pleasure. You want me to stop sharing screen for a moment? Is that what you're asking?
That would be ideal. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Super. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We've got a really important conversation for those of us that are doing international business. One of the things that I think we all have some capability in is intercultural capabilities and understanding that certainly that there are different cultures and that we need to make modifications. I don't think any of us, I'm not sure I've ever met too many people that have full understanding of all cultures and able to modify for every circumstance. It's very unusual. We certainly aspire to do that. And part of what today is about is to continually build our knowledge and expertise of working with people around the world with different cultures. I think we might end up having a monthly conversation. I think we probably should have done this before, but thanks to the Global Chamber Los Angeles chapter, the thought process has been to have a series of conversations that help business people do better business on the world stage. And the first one that they selected was this one today, Understanding and Navigating International Cultures. Next month, we have a conversation about global mindset. So January, February, we have a very powerful 1-2 punch around getting us more up to speed and learning more. We have two really outstanding speakers today. First, we'll have Jeffrey Darr. He's the senior principal at Darr and Newman. He's also the board chair of Global Chamber Los Angeles. One of the things I've learned about Jeff over the years is that he knows everybody and he works everywhere. So he has clients in over 30 countries, and he's able to navigate each one of those quite deftly, at least what I've seen, that it's worked out well, and he continues to grow his practice. And so I think that's a great indication of it. Well, Los Angeles is very global, where Jeff is located. He's actually given a presentation on just how global it is. And it's striking that he's been able to thrive in Los Angeles on the global stage, and it goes to how adept he is at intercultural capability. Our second speaker will be Professor Roberto Ansis. He's the CEO of Coaching Professors. He's also spent time in, as it turns out, in Los Angeles. He's on our Global Chamber Los Angeles Advisory Board. He's also the co-chair for our events committee of Global Chamber Los Angeles. Gentlemen, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you've got a lot planned. Jeff, why don't you kick us off with your presentation? We look forward to learning more.
Great. And thank you, Doug, for the introduction. Great to be here with Roberto. So I'm sure that the two of us will hopefully say things you probably know, but it's really good to hear things about cultural differences and cultural awareness over and over and over again, including even in our own mind speak internally, because it's something that frankly is a delicate subject. There is no magic black and white answer to any of it. And the more you just are conscious of it, the more likely you'll succeed. So that's hopefully what you'll get from this, whether we talk about things that you go, of course I know that, but it's good to hear it again, or things that you haven't really thought about. So with that in mind, let me get my screen going. There we go. There we go. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things with the theme of avoiding cross-cultural mishaps. I'm also going to talk about strategies of how to manage cross-cultural issues to avoid mishaps. So with that in mind, just some basic things. Everyone knows this, but it's always good, again, just to see things. So, what's normal to some is not normal to others. And I'm just sharing some photos just to, shed an idea as to what some people may think is odd, or whatever. And other people may think this is mainstream normal. And the fact that you're troubled by it is troubling to me. Some more lost in translation examples. Porkberry slice, probably not the real translation, but that's how you see it in markets. The misfit, sort of a opposite message here, right? But it still was being used for marketing. Maggot perfume, is that something that we think would probably do well in some places? I'm not sure about that name. Would some people find iguana meat consomme odd? I mean, actually, iguana meat I've had. So just to put in context of, and this is just some facts from Los Angeles, but it could be the state of California, it could be a lot of our world in different major metropolitan cities, but how cross-cultural differences are both international and domestic. As an example, in LA County, more than 224 languages, and there's really more than that. We have people home from 140 countries. International communities we have in Los Angeles and in California, the second largest populations for, I think it's now 7 different countries, meaning that the second largest population of people from those countries happen to be in California. And obviously we know Latin population, Asian population, but it's not the only ones. So getting into some more of the nitty-gritty part. So I want to talk about examples of differences that vary, but things, again, just to have you be thinking about them. Levels, when you're doing business, this is sort of the focus I want to do. Levels of formality regarded as normal can be quite different. The balance between work and personal time, culture of, you get people working 24/7 when need be versus people who, mañana means not tomorrow, but days and days away. And that could be the same difference in the same small communities around the world, including globally. It's just a mindset, but you have to think about that and avoid misunderstandings as to, what type of work attitudes there may be. Similarly, for example, attitudes toward time and punctuality. Even words in Spanish that may be the same word for now, in Spanish doesn't really mean immediately. It may more in Mexican Spanish mean like now. Like in the United States, if we say I want something now, we think of it, I want it today, versus, oh, that's sometime like tomorrow or the next day. And so these types of issues come up not just between our own culture, but internal cultures of the same country, same language. And there are many different concepts of social status and as to gender, as to age versus equality, and stereotyping. And the purpose of this is really just to keep in mind that there may be real big differences and to be open to them, welcoming. And I'm going to also next talk about how to navigate such areas where you may not even be aware of the minefield or differences. Oops. So some practical advice. When you're going to deal with people from another country, I find it really helpful to, do a little, doesn't have to be a lot, but a little studying of the basics of the culture of where you're going or who you're doing business with, and the actual people you're doing business with. So you have some idea where they may or may not be coming from. And keeping in mind obvious things like rude behavior in one culture may not be the same concept of what's rudeness somewhere else. Always be open-minded, as you sort of see as a constant theme of what I'm going to be talking about and have talked about. And I always find that if you do your homework, and all of us should be, if you're doing international multicultural things, be curious at heart anyways. That's probably why we're doing this in part. Show awareness and interest. People really respect the fact that you, as somebody from not their own culture or country, have an interest and know about a little bit and want to know more about other people's culture, their customs. My experience is people don't review that negatively. They actually usually are very responsive and positive and appreciate the fact that you're interested, but they take that as a positive, not a negative. So I would not be shy about those sort of basics. If you believe or have done something that you believe is contrary to what their expectations are in another culture, explain or apologize. Be very upfront about it. And pay attention to what people do and not say, because that is a lot of body language, and usually those things are somewhat on point. But, for example, there are cultures where, it's not polite to be assertive. So, I'm a lawyer. So if I'm dealing with a court proceeding, for example, there are cultures where you have to really think about the fact that you'll have a person who is a party or a witness, and their cultural perspective and training as to how they may present themselves may not be what we expect in the US is to be more forthcoming and appear to be transparent. They may be guarded because they've been taught to be guarded, and they've been taught to be, respectful by not saying things. So you have to deal with those type of messaging. Reciprocate as much as you can. And while you don't necessarily need to know all the ethnicities and religions and different nationalities or languages, but you should try to get a basic understanding of the differences. And again, people appreciate, is my experience, your paying attention to these things and showing interest. Some more practical advice. It's really helpful if I go somewhere and I know what's going on in their calendar as to events and holidays, people really appreciate the fact that, oh, you know about these things. I may not know about them a lot. I'll let them know that. They tell me, and you get friendships going that way, or at least mutual respect. And basically, probably the most important takeaway, before I get to some real nitty-gritty stuff on the legal side, check your assumptions and expectations at the door. Being as open-minded as possible is really the key to success. So when you're dealing with places where English, for example, isn't the dominant language, what do you do if you're doing business? How do you avoid cultural misunderstandings or language misunderstandings? So it's often in my experience that I have people with multiple languages, and nobody wants to have a contract that's not in their home language. So how do you deal with that? Not unusual. Often what I do is I will have a contract where I'll have 1 or 2 or even 3 languages. And you ideally, if it's 2 languages, for example, have them side by side. So left side, you have 1 language, right side, next language. That's easy enough. However, some of the tricks and problems that I want to just share, because I've seen them all, is if there is more than 1 language, big failure is when people don't provide that one controls over the other. I have experienced many times, I deal with translations in legal proceedings all the time. The same phrase, words may have official translations that differ, which may strike some people as, how is that possible? It happens all the time. I'll give a couple examples. So you want to say which language controls to avoid a dispute over key phrases having different meanings and different translations officially saying they're different. And you also want to make sure that the translation you're relying on, if it's not your language, actually says what you believe it says, because it may not. And that may be intentional or unintentional, but you want to take that extra step. So just some examples. I've done cases where these are like actual court trials where did a 5-week jury trial, mostly under French law, and everybody on my side testified in French. It was a French company, French accounting, had to explain to a jury. However, there was one agreement under French law that was sort of a cooperation type agreement of mergers that were to take place. And there was a best effort clause. And we had 2 official translations, each one different, each one certified translations of what the best effort meant. Was it what degree of best effort? So during the trial, the one phrase out of thousands of things in French that the judge had translated was this one key sentence. And it came back officially certified by the court's own translator expert witness with a 3rd meeting, all 3 certified. So you need to be conscious of those type of issues, and particularly making sure one controls and one, is going to be what you expect it to be. You also have an issue when you do business with other people, and it comes into this avoiding cultural misunderstandings as best you can. What type of law do you want? There are many types of basic legal systems. The 2 common ones are what we live in as a common law country, and the other one is a civil law country, which is most of Asia and Europe. Civil law countries are more statutory, so in some ways easier to understand if you know what the laws provide. At the same time, a lot of countries now have their statutes in civil law countries with official English translations, for example, for contracts, their contract law on the internet, so it's not that hard to master. So what you want to do when you have these types of issues is you want to avoid if you're based on what type of choice of law, things such as, do you likely to be in a situation where culturally you'll have issues because the choice of law you picked isn't going to be necessarily work to the cultural issues that you have on your side? Or will you be hometown, meaning are you agreeing to a type of process where it's going to favor the other side more than you would want because they're going to be protected by their own courts and legal system? You want to know the difference between the different laws? I would always, depending upon the type of business you're doing and what type of contract, consider consulting with local counsel in foreign countries. Doug mentioned I work closely with lawyers in over 30 countries. I do all the time. For example, this morning I've already been dealing with people in Beijing and Osaka, and I'll be momentarily dealing with people in Hungary, Budapest. So having a local attorney to refer to make sure you understand and get the right advice, whether you have a lawyer or not, can be very important. And the other part of every transaction you do is who's more likely to have a dispute. If you're the one expecting to be paid, you probably want to make sure you're paid and the other side doesn't have the interest of how do I avoid payment if I want to. So which choice of law also would be enforced by a court, or, and I'm going to talk about arbitration in a moment. Just because you choose a law, you want to make sure it's in a contract that's going to be honored by wherever you agree will be the venue, which I'll talk about, venue being where the proceeding would be heard if there was a dispute. And if there is no choice law provision, because sometimes people don't put one in, it's usually always better to do that, what law may govern by default in different forms? Things that are not in the slides I'm going to show you real quick, but important would be the strategizing of how to make sure early on what your dispute resolution provisions may be when you still have power to negotiate. The biggest flaw I see in business deals all the time that are international commercial transactions is a failure early on to think about these important issues I'm talking about to manage cultural differences and languages and so on by not doing them when you have the power of negotiating still versus doing them at the last moment or having someone just cookie cutter put in something that maybe never been tested, but well, here's something from some other contract. Those are what you don't want to do. Each type of commercial transaction that's international is going to be really somewhat unique to the situation, the parties involved, the nature of what it is that you may want. You want to avoid compliance. You may be the one who wants to make sure, for example, the easy one, you're getting paid. And if someone doesn't pay you, you have good likelihood of getting paid and being able to, if you had to go to get an award or a judgment, enforcing it in some meaningful way. So you want to control as much as you can of these issues early on when you have power versus when you have no more negotiating power. And I'm going to briefly just talk about venue issues, choice of law issues, enforcement of judgment issues, enforcement of arbitration issues, because they're quite different and very important to know. So real quick, venue is really where do you want to resolve problems? And commonly the problem is with negotiating power is who has more power, but you probably would rather have it on your own home turf, meaning in your local friendly courts versus somewhere else that, if you have to go to another country, you may not feel real friendly about that or know what you're doing. Jurisdiction issues to consider, meaning if you do agree on some place to go, whether it's likely there will be actual ability for a court to order things over parties versus you're in the wrong place to begin with. Often solutions are neutral locations. So if you're in United States and someone else is in France, you may want to pick somewhere else and no one is hometown. Or another common one I see is reciprocal locations. So whoever initiates the dispute gets to initiate it in the other person's turf. So if you have that dispute between you and somebody in France and you're the one who brings it, you bring it against the party in the place that you wouldn't want, and vice versa, as an incentive for people to work things out, because ideally you don't want to have disputes, right? Other venue issues, is there, do you want to think about where would the other side, what would they want? And you want to keep that in mind when you're sort of thinking about what you would want, because it's going to be a balance often. I mean, if you're doing a contract with some like Samsung, Samsung probably will have all the power, so you may not have any, but most commercial transactions are more little even keeled and not just one-sided giant companies you're dealing with. You want to think about which parties I alluded to is more likely to have the dispute, want their contract enforced, what type, again, going back to that choice of law, what type of law would be applied. And then the most important takeaway I'm going to talk about is arbitration versus litigation. And tied with that, what whether or not you may need provisional remedies. And what I mean by provisional remedies would be, well, I'll get to that in just a second here. But the other issue with arbitration versus litigation is to keep in mind, it's easy to say in your agreement, and I'll explain why you'd probably want to do arbitration over litigation if it's international. You want to pick also for a choice of law and a venue, meaning where the proceedings would be if you had to go to a court that's arbitration friendly, for example, so they'll enforce your agreement, which provides for a private resolution by arbitration. And then the most important takeaway of arbitration versus litigation is which one's more likely to be enforced if you have an arbitration award, essentially a judgment in arbitration, versus a court judgment. So how do you want to solve your problem? Litigation in a lot of parts of the world are really afraid to do business with us because we have this scorched earth approach of litigation and discovery that scares most business people in other countries because it's so invasive and so different from anything in their own country, which is cultural, by the way, as much as legal. We may have juries in some countries. We have them here. We have them in the common law countries, starting to see them in Japan and some other civil law countries. Provisional remedies, I mentioned, I would get to in a second, and enforcement powers. So if you have a dispute where it's going to involve, for example, a contract involving trade secrets, and if somebody breaches it, you may want to have an injunction preventing someone from using your trade secrets that were transferred or given access to in your business. You need to think about, if that were to be necessary in your part, would you rather have the ability to get an injunction from a court or an arbitration, and how would it actually work out? And so those are issues to think about. And in litigation, you usually get that right of appeal, a second opportunity to have someone in most places review what was done by the trial court. In arbitration, as we'll see, unless you build it into the process, you probably don't have that sort of safety check. Arbitration, on the other hand, is supposed to be faster and cheaper, not always. It's completely private, so that makes it also likely to be confidential, at least certainly more than a court proceeding, which it not depends on what country you're in, may be very public record. Certainly is in the United States. You won't have a jury. You may or may not have discovery, except for document exchange, which a lot of people prefer because it's much more economical and judicial and saving of money and time. But you can customize everything to make it binding. So if you think you have the need, if you had a dispute, things to think about, what documents would you need to prove your case? I've had cases where only document exchange and the discovery you needed, such as other companies' financials, may or may not be easily obtainable. So you could customize all of it. And again, generally there's no appeal. So if you talk to people in other countries, one way to avoid this fear of, if I have a dispute in the United States, I'm going to have endless expense and discovery, arbitration will work. But the key difference is when you look at enforcement, and this is going to be my closing stuff to talk about. So there's a major difference between enforcing a court judgment around the world versus enforcing an international arbitration award. And very simple, because it's not complicated, but really important to know. So if you have a dispute and you have to get your court judgment, because that's where you're agreed the parties will go to a court, whether it's here or some other place, if you get that judgment, how can you enforce it? And so there are, with the United States, really no treaties. There may be some friendship treaties, friendship agreements outside of World War II, but they're not going to really be that meaningful. But if you have a court judgment, for example, in the United States, and the other side's assets are in China or in Canada, England, you have to think about how likely is it that a foreign court will recognize and acknowledge a U.S. judgment, in your case, and actually enforce it where the assets are. It's just a lot of extra steps. And my experience is even using local attorneys to help guide you through the process so you do everything right, so that your judgment you get wherever it may be is likely to be enforceable, doesn't guarantee enforcement. You get hometown sometimes by courts being protective of their own. And there's just, because there's no treaty, very unpredictable outcome at times as to whether or not the judgment you worked so hard to get, or we're hoping the possibility of a judgment would convince someone to perform. Doesn't happen. On the other hand, since 1958, there's been an international treaty on arbitration for international commercial transactions. And there are, my slide says 160, there's actually now 170 plus countries. So virtually anywhere in the world you would do business, except for places like Iran, North Korea, not likely places, Chad, are signatories to the New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Arbitral Awards, commonly known as the New York Convention. And what that means is that if you do arbitration and you have an arbitration award, which is essentially the judgment of the arbitration, there's a treaty recognizing how it will be recognized and enforced by almost anywhere in the world. Huge difference, makes things much more predictable. And I noted that Taiwan's a notable non-signatory. However, Taiwan follows the New York Convention. They're just not allowed to be parties to treaties due to our interesting world politics. And the last thing, my last slide, mediation issues. When you want to deal with how to do business with different cultures and things, I find that building in a mediation process and the agreement is very helpful. Not that many years ago, the rest of the world wasn't with the United States on the understanding the concept of mediation, which is basically having a private neutral person who doesn't really care who's right or wrong, just help the parties see if they could come to a meeting of the minds and a deal, is now much more universal in most countries and legal systems. So by building in a mediation provision into your contract that before you go to court, you'll have a mediation of some kind. My experience is for dealing with people in different cultures, it's a upfront sign of we're trying to work this out without an actual dispute. And as a result, it helps manage those cross-cultural issues that come up by being in just totally different places, different cultures, different languages. And it may be a very cost-effective way of keeping your business relationship from falling apart when there is a dispute without anyone having to pull a trigger and go to a court or arbitration. And thank you. That's my presentation, and I look forward to questions.
Does anybody have any questions, please? Either raise your hand or unmute yourself and fire away. Great information, Jeff. Thank you.
And by the way, I'm happy to take questions at the end after Roberto presents so that we can both sort of answer questions, maybe. Just
okay. Let's do one question, then we'll go to Roberto.
This is Dwight Winkler. Yes. Having done contracts, drafting and negotiating largely in the Middle East over the last 15 years, I would also point out for those doing work in the Middle East that invariably they are going to be dual language, Arabic, English, but more importantly, especially if they are listed on a local exchange, they are going to have to be Sharia law compliant. And so for those wishing or desiring or going into the market of the Middle East, they really need to take the time out and familiarize themselves with the concepts of Sharia law and how that works. And that I won't opine further on the, in-depth pieces of that, but that is a very important element that one has to take into consideration if you're doing work in the Middle East.
Jeff, did you want to make a comment on
that? No, good points. I will note that depending upon where you are and what you do, and again, there are ways to manage all that. UAE has a court now that's much more business friendly. Not that cheap is my experience, but I try to use it with local lawyers. But there are many ways to manage those issues. It's just another example of doing your homework, being aware of things, and how do you manage if somebody on the other side wants a Sharia law? How do you come to something that works for your side too, so everyone's comfortable and you avoid what you could easily see a cultural misunderstanding possibly as to even what happens if there's issue of performance.
Thank you for the question, Dwight, and thanks for the answer, Jeff. Let's now go to Professor Ansis. And Roberto, could you let us know a little bit more? We have, it looks like 30 minutes left. How would you like to use the time?
Wisely.
Okay. That's a good idea. And by the way, I know you've had COVID. I've had COVID. Dwight's voice sounds a little rough. I don't know if you've been sick, but there's a lot going on. But really, just so that everybody can plan their time, this is like, will there be time for questions at the end? What would you like to do over the next 30 minutes? I know it'll be very wise.
Yes, Doug, thank you. The plan that I have is typically I have a PowerPoint. You know, professors always give you too much stuff. So I have a PowerPoint which I will have Cesar deliver to you. So you don't have to take notes. You can actually participate in the discovery process. And they will be about probably 10, 15 minutes. But the way I do, I actually work. Hello, Donna. It's nice to see you. And what is really great about this is that you become part of the presentation, because that's what it is. It's a common discovery. And then as we go along, there will be question and answers. And then at the end, there will be an open forum for people to make their own statements, to actually say who they are and everything else, Doug.
Okay,
And
so
of
you've
course, I
got
have a
about
PowerPoint.
15 minutes of interactive presentation, and then you've got 15 minutes of open mic,
Open
so people
forum,
can
yeah.
ask questions and make
Yeah,
comments. Okay,
absolutely.
very good. Well, without further ado, to Snowy Sedona, please go ahead.
Thank you. So one of the things that has been really interesting in my meeting clients from all over the world is the issue of time. One of the things that Jeff, in one of the slides that Jeff proposed, is the timing. Well, to give you an example, World War II, which was 1942 to 1945, my family lost probably about 6 or 7 apartment buildings in Sardinia. And we went to sue to actually collect monies. That was 1942, 1945. Our collection of damages was in 1968. So we're talking about 22, 24 years of practices in foreign cultures, courts. So the speed here in the US in courts is super fast in most cases. In foreign countries, my experience is that you just don't want to go to court. It's just settlement of the court is probably the best. Arbitration could be useful, sort of binding some time, and mediation as well. So, but the issue of time, and Laney writes a lot about cultures and everything else. So the thing is that when you make an appointment with a client in Switzerland, and they say, we're going to meet on Tuesday at 1 o'clock, time zone, right? That's 1 o'clock. And if you were, the meeting starts then. When you talk to an Italian and say, let's meet at 1 o'clock, sometime 1:10, 1:15, 1:30. What's really interesting is that culturally, in Europe, the person who is more important by law always gets later in the meeting. So, which is very interesting. But the other one is when I did business with the Faisal group, Faisal back in Jeddah, I had a meeting on Tuesday. So I'm there in Jeddah, right? So I show up, no Prince Faisal. Show up Wednesday, no Prince Faisal. He finally shows up Friday, no apologies, no nothing. Welcome, professor, love to see you. So the time element is like Einstein said, is very relative in international cultures. But let me tell you the topic of today, which let me go and retrieve my PowerPoint. Basically, one of the dilemmas that we always had in international business, culturally and quantitatively, we can talk about cultures. But what about assigning numbers to cultures? And we found out about 10, 15 years ago, Dr. Hofstede, who used to work for IBM, had an incredible system, and I'll describe the system today in terms of what the particular models are internationally for cultures. For example, we have the let me know if you see and this one here, you will have the PowerPoint, you'll have the PDF in your hand, so you'll see it. But ResearchGate has got a very interesting model on cultural models, which actually discusses race, gender, age, religion, language, sexual orientation, but it is qualitative again. Then we have one which is very interesting, also from a legal point of view, is written by semantic scholar, is basically how do you proceed internationally to reach what is called reconciliation of cultures or reconciliation of agreements. And this, you'll have the link so you can actually go visit. Finally, there's one which is very interesting in multicultural non-quantitative representation, is offered by Management Intercultural. And we do a lot of discussion on this model because each country has a different participation in the modeling and the involvement. The one that we're going to talk today about, though, is really the one that is quantitative, is the host-data quantitative model that describes basically 6 elements. One is called the power distance. One is called individualism versus collectivism. One is called uncertainty avoidance. One is called masculinity versus femininity. One is called long-term orientation versus short-term. And one is called indulgence versus restraint. So let me stop the sharing a second and ask, for example, where is Donahi? Donahi, can you hear? Donahi? Awesome. See, I have a question for you. You and I worked together many years ago, but can you tell the group a little bit, you being a woman, very professional woman, I totally admire Mexican women. They're most professional in the world, very well prepared. But what are the implications in the Mexican culture of the, let's say, overbearing masculine presence and the feminine activity, which is part of this quantitative? And I'll show you, by the way, the numbers that compare U.S. to the Mexican in a few minutes. Donahi, if you will.
Yes, well, there are some industries that are mostly dominated by men. This happened also in the US. I work in technology, so technology is one of them. Like women are trying to get a better place and a better share on all the technology area. Um, but there are some difficulties to overcome when you're a woman in a male dominated sector, or there are some challenges you need to face because you need to earn the respect of your male peers, that okay, even though she's a woman, she knows what she's talking about, kind of. So the machismo or the macho man, um, and sometimes even in educated people, are underlaid and they are not taught, but they're still on the unconscious collectiveness in Mexico. So I will say that it's improving, but still, for example, maybe a generation from me, I'm 40, so somebody that will be my mom, my somebody between 60s to 70s, when they study engineer, and she was a woman, she was the only one studying
Class. Oh, yeah.
as a woman, a male thinking major. Even though now it's different, but in that times, that was how it went. So
Awesome.
it's still happening, it's improving, but I could say that as a woman, you need to overcome more challenges to be on the same level or even than for our peers that are men.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. The other question that I want to have, and these, by the way, all these elements are clearly outlined in the PowerPoint PDF that you receive, masculine versus femininity. Now, what I've done here, at the beginning of the PowerPoints, I have all the definitions, so they're real clear. And by the way, these are all quantitative, so you will see numbers at the end. But like, for example, here is the Mexican culture, and there is a qualification here in particular. And then here there is a comparison of the US in terms of cultures, power distance, individualism, masculinity, etc. And here there is a comparison between the two countries, where purple would be the US and blue instead would be Mexico. But Lainey, when we look at the element of what we call uncertainty, which is risk in business, could you address your experience in the response, for example, from a country of your choice versus the US in terms of risk perception? Like, for example, let me give an example. In Italy and in Israel, you go to company here in the US, you are a consultant and people say, how much money we're going to make next year, how fast you're going to get the market. And the answer is, let's say, for example, well, we can make about 12 million, $15 million the first year. In the US, there would be a welcome. If you say $12 million to an Italian small entrepreneur or an Israeli entrepreneur, you're going to lose them because they don't believe you. They think that you're selling smoke. They don't believe they can reach that number. And similarly also in Mexico. So Lainey, what is this element of perception of risk, which in the US, you have a great, often Vegas is a great place, right? People go to experience risk. So there is this sort of embracement of risk, but internationally it becomes a real barrier to basically communicate and to develop business. Can you give us a few thoughts of your experience, which I know you have? And your speaker is off right now. Yeah.
That's always my first thing, is remembering to turn on the mic. So I think one of the things that makes the US different than all these other countries we're going to talk about in terms of uncertainty avoidance, which is really trying to make the world more predictable. It's the difference between, in the US, it's okay to fail, to have things not work out. Somebody translated fail as first attempt in learning. And so the US comes to, are more comfortable with this whole idea of things might not work out, but we'll figure out how to make it work. And in other countries, you always find that there are lots of rules because people are trying to avoid that feeling of uncertainty, of being afraid. I can't say that in this moment I can give you a specific example, but I think it is really an important thing to think about, that for Americans, uncertainty is okay. You can try to manage things, but in most countries in the world, the whole idea of uncertainty is frightening. So you'll find one clue about where a country is on that scale of uncertainty avoidance is to look at how many rules there are, how many laws, how many things that people try to do to make life more predictable. And because in the attitudes are that if you fail, if it doesn't work, maybe you never recover from that. And here in the United States, the question is, well, if you failed, what did you learn and when are you going to try again? So I think that's something to look for as you start to work someplace. Thanks for
Totally, Lainey. Thank you so much for your insights. And I'm sure that, and thank you also for the identification of the element. Risk embracement or risk avoidance is one of the most important elements for either success or failures of international business. The other element, which I would like to get Clivia feedback, is, let me give you an example, is called long-term versus short-term. So you go to an Italian company, you go to a French company, you go to a German company, Clivia, and they say, we want to come to the US, right? And the second question, you agree on agreement, et cetera, et cetera. And I explain typically, first we got to do research, you got to compare the product, you got to make sure the product is acceptable from a certification regulation point of view, liability point of view. You got to make sure that the product is priced correctly. You got to make sure the product has got competitive elements. When you start telling that to a foreign entity, to a foreign company, you just see their eyes becoming almost blank. And their major answer, Clivia, is when we're going to have sales. For example, the Italian company say, okay, I'll send you trucks, or I'll tell you containers of furniture, just sell it. Well, it just doesn't work that way. Computer companies, digital companies want to set up business bigger. When are we going to have, how many sales we're going to have in the first month? And it's very typically is a lack of education or really long term what American is. America's got 8 fundamental cultures. And one of the elements of the American, I'm not going to buy it if I'm not protected by some customer service. And so they're really interested in the long term, but the foreign companies interested in the short term. Clivia, have you found those to be true in your connections internationally? And your mic right now is on.
I have found that, yes, companies want information and want to move on something, but not so much interested always in the process and what it takes to get there and the long-term planning.
What would you say is that foreign nation or culture you become familiar that seem to have the biggest resistance to it?
With the companies that we do business with, I would say maybe some are in Spain, and we've also had Germany.
Yes, yes. Germans, especially from a behavioral point of view, Germans are analytical individuals. And so they want to have all the answers before they start, which of course you don't have, but they don't want to spend the time to get the answers. So thank you, Kliga, very much. Really appreciate it. So as you can start seeing it, is that these elements, power distance, what does it mean? Power distance is the relationship between the top echelon of the company and the rest of the company. And a high level of power distance, it means that the class of management is diversified in blocks. And for example, the US is 40. Why? Because if 40 meaning is a fairly low level of power distance, it means that pretty much when you move forward with the project, the workers, the project managers, and the VPs of the company and the president are aligned with the process. Instead, an 81 would mean that the top decides what we're going to do, and you're going to do because if you don't do this, you'll be fired. In fact, in Japan, you'll find out that the power distance is very, very low, meaning that everybody has to agree. And in Saudi Arabia and in the Middle East, you found out that the power distance is very high, meaning that few people make decisions. So it's going to be really interesting when you receive this PDF document. By the way, the actual training for this particular Hofstede quantitative system is 2 days and 16 hours. So in the 20 minutes we're discussing it, this cannot be explained totally. But if you just get the sense of the value of the tool, and then you go in, I'll put here all sort of references and definitions and whatnot, so that you can actually go and verify everything. There is actually a manual on this here, but this is, in my experience, internationally, one of the best tools to be able to predict, should I do business with this country? Should I not do business with this country? Here I have only Israel. Here I have Russian culture. Here you have the Canadian culture. Here you have Italian culture. Here you have the South Korean culture. So I've included several examples for you to get a sense. I got South Africa, I got Germany. Individually, you can see it's quite high. Long-term orientation, that's it. The German are always looking long-term. So this that you have, PDF file document you've received, will be basically an invitation for you to look deeper in the topic, which is very, very complicated, but also the ability to have a discussion of the 7 or 6 different elements, which are called indexes, is really important. It will make you really better prepared in international business. And personally, we had about 1,100 clients, and I'll tell you, it's always nice to know what you're going to be encounter. Surprises are not welcome in international business, like any bankers will tell you. So I'm going to open up the floor for any questions you may have. And Dwight, maybe you want to make a comment on the Mideast regarding their sensitivity to top decision making and mandating it. And Anita can probably make the same comment, and also addressing the element of risk.
Well, it's a very top-down approach, and it's in the hands of a limited few, generally speaking, has been my experience, and that over the last, I would say, 15 years of my more recent experience there. So most of your middle management level even don't have if they have any decision making power, it's very limited. So I mean, in my time in the Middle East, I can tell you that there was a steady parade day in and day out down to the corner office to the GM of that particular division within the company. Why? Because nobody wanted to step slightly out on the limb to go to work and make or take a decision. So there's no empowerment or limited empowerment. Which if you're trying to, which if you're trying to drive a project and drive to meet certain KPIs, can be very, very challenging, because there's also, shall we say, a less than stellar time sensitivity.
Yes.
And that the famous phrase in the Middle East is inshallah, if
yeah.
God wills.
If God wills.
Now that can mean anything you want it to mean in that to suit the situation. And I'm not trying to be disparaging in saying that, but that is a very, very, very common phrase.
That's very true, and thank you so much for mentioning it. That's why this Hofstede element is so important. Tamara, welcome from, I know that your experience in South America. What would you say the decision-making element in South America, and is that distributed throughout the company, or is it really made by the top?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'm always careful about those kinds of labeling, because sometimes companies don't agree with the culture, and sometimes people don't agree with the culture. Like, I'm from South America, and I don't think I fit exactly where South Americans fit. But the answer to your question would be, usually is the boss who takes the decision. They usually don't hear more than one or two other people, and they, power levels are high.
Yeah, in fact, when we had the prospect from the medical company, you and I, a few months ago, the CEO was the one making the decision. Everybody else we met had nothing to do with it. So I would say, let me close. The PDF will go out. Thank you again. Doug will probably mention the next program that we're going to have next month, which is the wellness program, which is really powerful with Susie Wong. And by the way, April, very important month. I've been spending the past 3 months, when I didn't have COVID, when I spent in the past 3 months on the real ability of AI to be used for international business. A lot of misnomers, a lot of misinformation in the field. So it's going to be really important in April that you attend. It's going to be really an incredible piece for international business. What can you really use AI, including law, including business, including trade, including targeting, including research? Powerful. I mean, what I'm doing has not been done is almost like a PhD dissertation. So you're really welcome to come, and I'll invite you to. You'll be part of the development of that. Send me questions that you have in international business, but AI could be used, but wisely. Doug, your floor.
Well, keep asking questions, as Jeff has asked in the chat, and reach out to us by email. You mentioned about Susie Zhang. So she, I don't think she's on the call here, but she's speaking. Global Chamber Los Angeles has a regular programming, and the next one is February. Actually, the next one is next week, the 16th. We have a cross metro meetup between Tel Aviv and Los Angeles. And we've also included Chicago, Phoenix, and London in that meetup. So feel free to jump in there. Also, Anita Rodal, I see, is on the call. Anita, you have something coming up as well, don't you?
I do. Thank you. We have our monthly Import-Export Forum. It's the fourth Thursday of the month. So January 25th, noon California time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 8 o'clock in London, and fill in all the other time zones. Hope you can make it. The idea is that I will be interviewing a couple of people. Jeff Dar will be one of my interviewees, and Jermeel Lewis Johnson, who is a customs broker. We want to get a conversation going about all aspects of import-export. It overlaps a lot with what you, Professor Ansis and Jeff have talked about today. It integrates. Everything is involved when you're dealing with other countries, and then you throw in products and what direction things are moving. So it's going to be a lovely conversation, ongoing conversation. No two conversations will be the same. We will involve people in the audience. So hope you all can make it.
Fantastic, Anita. The artificial intelligence conversation we're having, we've started now a monthly conversation. It's the 18th of February, and Susie Zhang's conversation, she's going to have almost like a quarterly conversation about health while you're doing global business. And hers first one this year is February 7th. It's a Globinar on wellness. Eat right with a busy schedule while traveling abroad is the topic of that one. And then our next conversation about intercultural is with Renee Meyer, who's our global advisor in Strasbourg. And also she's involved with Freiburg and Basel, Switzerland, and Freiburg, Germany. And she'll be speaking with, who will she be speaking with? I think I have to click on to remember who that was. Oh, it's Lainey. She's in the call. Oh my God. Lainey, what are you guys going to be talking about on the first?
Global mindset, and there are going to be, I think, 4 different global chamber members from around the world who are also going to be sharing their perspective about what a global mindset is. And I think everybody has their own definition of that and how it's shaped the work they do. So come and join us for an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Lainey. 2 amazing members on here. Every member of Global Chamber is amazing, but 2 special ones are Casey Branch. Casey, how are you? Are you in San Luis Obispo today? Are you in Paris? Where are you? Casey is the world's best wine attorney. So if you ever want to know about the wine industry, Casey is on top of it. Cannabis as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Happy New Year to all of you. Nice to see you all. Yes, it's been an interesting first part of the year, dealing with Korea and Japan and England all this morning. So a lot of people want to bring alcohol to this country from various places. But going back to what Lainey talked about earlier in terms of the world's confusion about our lack of rules. And I had that discussion with England this morning. Because we have a workaround in the alcoholic beverage industry about interstate shipping. And of course, the whole idea of interstate shipping is very confusing anyways to foreigners. But here they go, well, we just want to make sure it's legal. And I said, well, it's legal. There is nothing called legal. It's called unlitigated. So if it's unlitigated, we have no idea whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. If we have an argument. And they go, so we have to build an entire business based on an argument? I said, yes. Because, you don't want to spend $1 million litigating this and potentially losing. It's better to just keep it out as an argument. And it was very, very difficult for these English people to understand that.
Amazing. Thanks for jumping in. And I wanted to circle back with you because we've talked about doing a podcast at the Paris Olympics. Hopefully that's still on your radar screen. Would love to be able to do that. There's a number of people that are very interested in that. So
Oh, that's great. And you know, it'd be great to do sort of a real meetup with everybody, do kind of a survey of everybody in the Global Chamber and see who's actually going to be there. And we could all get together for a glass of wine or something at a location. You know, people from all over the world are attending, so it'd be fun to have a live Global Chamber event in some location. I think that'd be totally fun in one of the rooftop bars or something.
We're ready. And Bill Edwards, maybe we can close with you if you're available to chat. Are you live and available just to say hi? Bill Edwards has 50 years of international business experience, longtime Global Chamber member. He has a bi-weekly conversation about what's going on in the world. It's an analysis that you should be reading. It's just outstanding. He's an advisor on global business, the top one in the world as far as I know. Bill, are you available? Say
I'm
hi.
here.
Fantastic.
Good morning, everybody.
What did you think of the conversation today on intercultural?
Well, as I said in the chat, even though I've been doing this for 50 years and lived in 7 countries and worked on projects in 50, I still keep up with what's going on in culture. And my 2 sources are Lanny, first of all, Lanny, and then also Terry Morrison, who wrote the book Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. But you know, culture seldom changes much, but it changes a little bit, and it certainly has changed due to COVID in many countries. So it's really good to have this kind of a presentation and keep up with what's going on today. I just got a big kick out of Jeff. I spent a lot of time, Jeff, with license agreements around the world, and everything you said was something we do, because you have to be extraordinarily careful. Nobody likes to see the country being the United States because of our litigious background, but we still try to get it anyway. Thank you for putting this on, Doug.
Thank you. And Michael Quigley, can you say a word? Because one of the topics for me that came out of this was the concept of intercultural and leadership and bringing that all together. You've written a book, you've written on loving leadership. That's just everybody should be reading that or read that. It's just outstanding. And Michael is amazing. Can you say hi? Or are you available? Oh, there you are. How are you?
Great, thank you. Happy New Year to everybody. I think
what did you think of the conversation today?
I find it fascinating. I've made 4 pages of notes. Thank you so much. You've saved me so much hassle. It's been so interesting. I think what's really good as well is to look at the things that are underneath all culture, like love, death, the things we're all going to experience, even though we experience them culturally differently. There are certain things that when you know, like when you smile, most people smile back. I'm fascinated by those. And I think what's really good is these kind of workshops increase our emotional intelligence so that we're culturally more aware and we're able to find middle grounds, and then sometimes know when we've got to go to somebody's ground and then they go to ours, and the choices around that rather than just it's this way or nothing. So you've really helped me to reflect on that, both on a legal side and a cultural side. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your leadership. Really appreciate it. By the way, I have a picture of Bill Edwards when I met him a few months ago in Marina Del Rey. So I had to post that up, Bill. Jeff, do you want to make any closing comments?
I did, thank you. So also another program that Global Chamber is a co-sponsor of, it'll be the 3rd California International Arbitration Week, March 11 to March 14, which will be in person in San Francisco for 4 days with incredible networking opportunities in person, as well as programs streamed all day long that'll be able to be seen on home virtually. And last 2 years we've had close to 1,300 registrations from 80 countries, and we will have leading speakers from around the world, literally from around the world. So mostly non-US speakers coming from all the leading arbitral institutions and virtually everywhere you can imagine, speaking on the issues we've been talking about. And I'll just give one example. We talked earlier about, a lot of Mexico. So I've been involved with doing a lot of enforcement and recognition of judgments from courts and arbitration awards. And one example of why arbitration can be so important. In arbitration, you can pick who your arbitrators are. So you can pick people who are culturally sensitive, people who are familiar with international transactions, versus a court where they may have zero familiarity with any of that. And an example would be, I've enforced judgments from Mexico, for example, particularly Jalisco, Guadalajara, and I've even done that in Korea. And of course, in Korea, the very first question asked, and this is not unusual, is, so please tell us, has Mexico ever recognized and enforced a Korean judgment? At that time, couldn't find one. Don't know if there is one today because I haven't looked recently. And that reciprocity concept in a court versus arbitration exists in the United States. We have, I think, 5 states in the United States that require reciprocity for a judgment to be recognized from another country. They have to recognize the ones from, that particular state. So international arbitration, think about signing up. The registration will be going live momentarily. It can be done virtually or in person. And there's culturally, it's frankly something to be really aware of for your business as to how to avoid disputes, manage disputes, and deal with foreign cultures, because you manage the process. And that's why I just wanted to close, since Global Chamber has been kind enough to support the prior 2 years of California International Arbitration Week, which, by the way, people from all over the world now fly in for. So it's a major international event in just 3 years. And I'm very proud that Global Chamber has been a co-sponsor since day one, the first year. So thank you.
And it's on our website, at least the general information. And as Jeff mentioned, the sign up is soon. Great progress there. And it's in the Bay Area this year.
Yeah, this year it'll all be in San Francisco, one location, but it'll also be virtual. So, what we've done in the past is programs are available for streaming for 30 days virtually. And we're talking about, I think this year we're going to have 28 hours of programming, which is pretty amazing. And again, from some of the most diverse in all aspects, diversity from, gender, country, culture, on how to manage international disputes, how international arbitration works, with the focus of having more disputes in California be heard, seeded from around the world, so that we can make California more on the radar of, it doesn't matter where the parties are, but where you want to have your dispute actually heard. California being a very friendly location for enforcing arbitration agreements, which is that thing I mentioned earlier. You can have an arbitration agreement. If you go to Brussels, you may not be so happy about being in Belgium because they may not enforce your arbitration agreement like you want. So you need to think about all these little aspects. But as you've been hearing, a lot of advantages of international arbitration for international transactions.
Thanks, Jeff. Does anybody, we've gone a little over, so thank you for hanging on. Does anybody have any final comments, anything that's coming up that we should know about? I feel like Lainey wants to say something. No? Oh, okay. Oh, you're on mute.
That program on global mindset, 1st of February, see it, sign up on the website. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you. And Clivia, thank you for being such a good sport there with Professor Ences. That was awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll have a great rest of your day. Our next event, actually, we have nothing tomorrow, which is unusual, but we start on Martin Luther King Day, which may be not the right thing to do, but somehow we ended up scheduling a Global Chamber Africa event on that day. And we've got, I know, at least 3 really great speakers. And then that Los Angeles, Tel Aviv meet up on Tuesday, and a variety of other things next week. Have a great rest of your week. Happy New Year.
Thank you, guys.